All right, see some people joining here this afternoon. We're going to hang on for probably a minute or so before we go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Still see some folks joining. We'll go give it probably another 30 seconds or so, and we'll get kicked off here. All right. Let's go ahead and get things started here this afternoon. So I just want to say thank you for everybody for joining and welcome to our webinar here. Chris and I really looking forward to our session today, which is really going to be focused on helping light industrial firms streamline and automate your middle and back office operations. And it's especially important as we continue to really experience a dynamic market before us. And so we wanted to make sure that the industry, and of course, in particular, our prospects and our customers especially, everyone's informed about the trends that we're seeing in the market, what we're hearing from workers, and what actionable steps that you can take to ensure that your pay and bill operations are meeting and exceeding those needs. So with that quick intro, I'm going to hand things over to Jocelyn for just 30 seconds on some webinar housekeeping items, and then we'll kick off with the rest of our content for today.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn. I'm on the Bullhorn marketing team. I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. Number one, the session will be recorded today and shared with you guys tomorrow in an email. Everyone will be on mute for the duration, but feel free to ask any questions throughout the session in the dedicated panel, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of the session. If we don't answer your question, we'll definitely follow up with you afterwards. All right, back to you, Andrew.
Thank you. So before we get into our content today, just want to do a super quick intro and background on ourselves. So my name is Andrew. I'm a solution consultant here at Bullhorn. I've been serving the staffing industry for the last 8 years or so. And during that time, I've worked very closely with many of our commercial and light industrial customers of all sizes, and specifically helping them focus on strategy and technology and front to back operations. And from that work, I've gained really a unique perspective and understanding on many of the key challenges and nuances that the industry is facing. Prior to Bullhorn, I actually worked in the payroll funding and invoice factoring space, where I was very closely aligned in helping light industrial staffing firms optimize those operations there as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Chris and from Green Shades to do a quick introduction on himself.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for your time today. Definitely excited for this conversation. Just a brief intro on me. So I've been in the payroll space and workforce management for the last 20 years. Spent the last 15 years at Green Shades, definitely with a heavy focus on staffing throughout those years. In my time at Green Shades, I've had a variety of roles. I've led our product development team, done quality assurance, compliance, revenue strategy, operations, and new client implementations as well. So really, it's been a lot of fun, and it's really been a great opportunity to work with our clients in all sorts of different capacities. But throughout that process, as a certified payroll professional through the American Payroll Association, ultimately, my number one priority is going to be to help employees get paid timely and accurately. I really, quite honestly, love diving in deep on payroll topics and compliance discussions, especially as it relates to technology and best practices. And in the little time that I have when I'm not working, I typically am out on a baseball field coaching my kids' baseball teams. So thanks again for your time today.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So as we transition into what we're going to cover in our presentation today, we really wanted to zero in on 3 primary buckets or areas of concern that we're hearing in the industry. And so these are things that staffing firms are looking to solve through technology and through process and through partnership. And when we looked at things like market research and SIA analysis, and even our own Bullhorn trends and customer surveys, we quickly identified three common themes that were top of mind for light industrial staffing firms. Primarily, creating worker loyalty and the importance of building and maintaining a strong worker network. In addition, adapting to those worker preferences, so ensuring that your firm meets the needs and the expectations of the modern worker. And then lastly, building operational efficiency. And so that last chapter, there's going to be a really strong focus on improving internal productivity and creating an incredible experience for your customers and your workers, as well as your internal employees as well. But what does each one of these themes mean for your firm, and how does it impact your ability to attract and retain and really deploy a workforce that enables you to stand out and differentiate against your competition? So let's go ahead and dive right into the first chapter here of creating worker loyalty and start to get a bit more granular on what this means and the impacts to the industry. Now, when we think about the importance of worker loyalty, and particularly within the context of staffing, I think that to better understand this concept, we need to even zoom out a little bit here and think about some of our own personal experiences for the brands that we use today and the ones that we're loyal to. And I'm going to start us off with just a brief 1-minute personal anecdote to set the stage here. And so I wanted to provide some context around how Spotify, my music streaming platform of choice, really gained my loyalty. And as somewhat of an early adopter, how did they go about doing that? And why have I used it for so many years? And I realized that so much of that loyalty was traced back directly to my experience with the platform, the UI, and the way that they communicate with me. And all of that works in tandem such that I've not even considered exploring another music streaming service because my experience has been that good over time. I have things like personal concert recommendations. I have playlists being built and curated for me. And then best of all, their new AI recommendation tool always seems to know what I'm in the mood for based on everything it knows about me and my expectations. So what I wanted to do there with just a brief personal anecdote is have each of you think about and really reflect on the programs or the services and the subscriptions that you're loyal to based on experience and how you're treated as a customer. And so with that concept in mind, I wanted to translate this idea back into the context of staffing and really see what the industry is telling us. What have workers and firms alike shared as far as what is the biggest impact on worker loyalty? And so here's what we found. And certainly as expected, this is a multifaceted issue, and it really spans the totality of the talent experience felt by your workers as they do things like apply to jobs, they're engaging with their recruiters, and then ultimately out to work on their assignments. An incredible worker experience is critically important throughout the entirety of this life cycle. But let's zoom in even a little bit closer on one of these pillars here in particular, and that is going to be the importance of timely payments, which we know is paramount. Now, I'm even going to add a second layer to this, which is not only the concept of timely payments, but accurate ones. And so what we found here through our light industrial grid survey is that there's a massive delta between positive worker experience and a negative one when we are talking about delivering pay on time and accurately. And so what's the impact of all of this data? Now, I'm sure that we can all recollect on a time where a worker may have not been paid on time and the consequences of that. Perhaps they walked off a job site, maybe they left a bad review or otherwise negatively impacted your reputation. And so our idea here was twofold. Not only did we want to bring more attention to the impact of timely and accurate payments, but most importantly, what can Bullhorn and Green Shades do to help? And so we're going to continue to expand on that here for the next few moments. Chris, what's been your experience here with worker loyalty and the impacts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, even for me personally, prior to getting into payroll myself, I was definitely impacted by this as an employee in the past, and can certainly say that absolutely impacted my loyalty to that company. But in reality, what tends to happen with payroll professionals, and what I see firsthand, is that anytime there's a gap there where there appears to be an issue or something that could lead to a payment being delayed, most payroll practitioners are going to do whatever it takes to get over that line and to make sure that those employees can get paid timely and accurately, because we do know the impact that will have on the workforce, and it can be so critical. And so ultimately, the gap is filled by those payroll professionals going above and beyond. So exactly like you said, Andrew, today we're going to be talking about ways to avoid that so that folks aren't having to work nights and weekends to make sure those employees can get paid timely.
Certainly, and thank you for the context and the insight there. I think that's a perfect transition into, well, what can we actually do to ensure that those payments are timely and accurate? And so we've taken that and outlined 5 key steps that each firm can deploy to their process to ensure we are driving that accurate and timely pay. So I'm going to focus here really on our first 3 recommendations, then I'll pass things back over to Chris to touch on the last few. But I wanted to start us off with accurate direct deposit information. And that one certainly seems like a no-brainer. Obviously, there's a myriad of ways to pay your workers, but it's very important to have a system in place that can quickly and easily onboard your workers and collect their preferred payment information. So during that digital onboarding experience with Bullhorn, your workers are going to be electronically completing all of those required documents, W-4, I-9, direct deposit information, and all of that data seamlessly flows into and updates GreenShades so that when payroll is ready to be processed, all of those fresh new hires will have up-to-date direct deposit information and be paid there accordingly. Now, once those workers have been onboarded and cleared to start, the next important piece to this puzzle is going to be centralizing and streamlining the collection of time. So think about your largest and your most complex customers that you are collecting time from. Chances are you're going to have a lot of different ways that time is being reported. You could have paper timesheets, punching in and out on a physical clock, could even be allowing mobile punching with geofencing, depending on your comfort levels there. But the idea is that it's important to have a digitized and centralized time collection process that makes it easy for your workers to submit and approve time and easy for your payroll team to get those hours processed accordingly. And we're going to continue to expand on that a bit more in our discussion as well. And then lastly, accurate pay rates. And so that takes me into my third bucket, where with Bullhorn, there's a lot of checks and balances inherent to the system, which start to build in layers of protection and automate the assigning of proper pay rates. So for example, we have things like client rate agreements, which enable you to take your contractually agreed upon rates with your customers, set those parameters into Bullhorn such that anytime a placement is made, the system already knows which rate to apply. Related to that, we also have a robust time and labor engine, which works to automate and interpret raw time data and calculate that accordingly. And then when we talk about getting payroll processed, all of that accurate and interpreted time data is living in Bullhorn. And then, as I mentioned, it's seamlessly transmitted over to GreenShades, where payroll and tax processing are completed. So this is the importance here of really having that best in breed of solutions to automate and digitize and streamline those first 3 pillars we just covered, because this is where those middle and back office gains are realized. So as we look forward here into pillars 4 and 5, I'm going to pass things over to Chris to cover how GreenShades is uniquely positioned to address these areas from a payroll and tax and compliance standpoint.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Andrew. So, as Andrew noted, there's multiple steps, leading up to this point. And so when it comes time to actually get the workforce paid, we need to be able to do it quickly, right? Having a quick turnaround of payroll, I mean, that's just the expectation within the staffing industry. So we'll talk more about how that works. And then ultimately, once we do get workers paid, inevitably, there's going to be things that happen, whether there's a termination or some kind of unplanned event where we have to do some sort of off cycle or adjustment pay run. So we need to be able to easily, accurately, and quickly be able to process that. So if you can jump to the next slide, we'll jump into number 4 here, just a little deeper. So when it comes to the speed, right, and swift processing of the payroll, again, that is critical, and that is purely the expectation within the staffing space. We have tight windows that we're working with when our customers, get us the time, and we need to be able to quickly turn around that pay. So within the GreenShades system, the whole way that it's built and the whole way that it's designed is to be a seamless, easy workflow that's going to guide you through the process so that when you are up against tight deadlines, you'll have the ability to easily work through that pay run process quickly and accurately. And as noted earlier by Andrew, that direct deposit information is all going to be flowing into GreenShades automatically. We can easily see that to ensure not only are the employees being paid accurately, but they're also going to be paid in the right account. We also, when it comes to managing the workforce, so many of our customers are in scenarios where they have many workers that have garnishment orders, right? Whether it's child support or tax levies or any type of court order. And it might be just one order, it could be 3 or 4 orders. And frankly, garnishments are challenging for employers to manage, but it's something that you don't really have much of a choice over. So that is something that's built directly into GreenShades. We'll go a little bit deeper on that here later, but that is absolutely something that we are well set to handle. And then finally, as we're thinking about, again, that rapid payroll processing, we want to make sure that, yes, we need to move through it quickly, but we need to be alerted if there are any potential issues. And so for the last 20 plus years, the GreenShades has been involved in payroll processing. We have learned and we have a clear understanding of, what are the types of scenarios that are ultimately going to cause issues down the road. So what are the things that we can proactively do to bring to your attention? And there's so many accurate and positive things that are happening within Bullhorn before payroll is ever processed that allow you to proactively avoid issues, as Andrew's already began touching on. But then as we're processing payroll, again, as a final check, if there is anything that potentially stands out or a scenario that we know, hey, this may not be entirely wrong, but we think it needs to have an extra set of eyes on it, we're going to automatically flag that and bring that to your attention. So once we make it through payroll, and Andrew, I'll have you jump to the next slide here. For the final point around this for number 5, we've processed payroll, everything is good, but then something happens, right? Maybe it is an adjustment, maybe there was a late time card submission, maybe there was a mistake somewhere along the way, and so we need to have an adjustment, or again, it could just be something like a termination, or maybe a one-off bonus that needs to happen, a commission payout, something of that sort. At any point, in addition to all the payable charges that are flowing from Bullhorn into GreenShades seamlessly, if you need to have any type of off-cycle payroll beyond our standard scheduled payrolls, that's something that's built right into the product, very easy to manage and to run on the fly. So again, very quickly, we can fire up what we refer to as a special pay run. You can identify which employees you need to get paid. Again, whether it's a termination pay, you need to quickly release their final paycheck, or again, one-off bonus, or make some type of an adjustment to a prior pay run. All the necessary data is going to flow in from Bullhorn, but again, without going back and adjusting our core settings or doing anything in a major way, we can quickly and rapidly just jump in and say, hey, I need to run an off-cycle payroll, provide kind of the key parameters that we need, and then we can quickly get those employees paid. And with that, I'll pass it back to Andrew so we can start talking about how to adapt to worker preferences.
Great, thank you, Chris, and certainly appreciate all the context and really focusing on the importance of having an agile and flexible system to accommodate those unique scenarios. So that puts a wrap here on our first chapter, where we covered the importance of creating worker loyalty and more specifically, the role that accurate and timely payments plays in delivering that incredible worker experience. So with that, let's go ahead and turn the page into the second chapter of our discussion today, which in many ways is very interrelated to the first. And we're not going to be able to build a loyal worker community if we are not listening to their preferences. So let's get a little bit deeper here into what some of those preferences are and what we're hearing from the industry with a really specific spotlight on our workers. So how do our workers want to get paid? And in light industrial staffing, we know that speed and agility is everything. Your time to apply, your time to fill, and thereby your speed to pay the workers. All of that is really driven by an inherent sense of urgency. And we know that the demands of the light industrial sector are always subject to rapid changes due to things like seasonal peaks and consumer trends and even global supply chain factors. And so as a dynamic firm, this same concept extends and really applies to the expectations that your workers have. They have that same sense of urgency and expectations for those needs to be met. So what's really interesting about this data that we pulled from our light industrial spotlight is that over 70% of workers want to be paid via direct deposit. And so when we talk about preference and timely payments, this is really unique because this starts to span generations. There's a ton of similarity here between Gen Z and millennials and Gen X, which we do not always see in other staffing-related research and polls. This data is also supported by SIA, where we see very similar results in their data and research as well. So when we talk about attracting and retaining talent, something as simple as this worker preference can make a really large impact in how you differentiate and continue to adapt to worker expectations as they change over time. Now, what's interesting about all of this, and looking back historically, even to just a few years ago, The delta between the preference of pay cards and direct deposit actually used to be much smaller, and that gap has accelerated quite quickly over the last 2 years. And with this being such a stark adjustment, it's important for firms to recognize this and really ensure that the collection and the updating of this information is painless for your workforce. And so we recognize that there's always going to be some workers who do prefer a pay card or want live checks. But if we zoom out and look more broadly at the shifts in worker preferences, or maybe even how financial transactions are being increasingly digitized, it makes sense that we now see this shift towards unparalleled convenience and immediate access to earnings. Chris, what's been your experience here with preferences between pay cards and direct deposit?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting because when I first saw this data, I was initially a little bit surprised to see this change, but then I started thinking more about it and started thinking about the conversations that I have with clients every day, and it really makes a lot of sense, right? So pay cards for so long had been kind of that transition into digital payments. So workers that had historically been receiving paper paychecks, and they were an unbanked worker. They didn't have a bank account. They were intimidated by direct deposit, and a pay card was a nice kind of introduction into that. But like you said, Andrew, pay cards are certainly still a thing. We still absolutely have, workers paid through Green Shade's payroll that are being paid via pay cards, but direct deposit continues to be the primary source of payment and really the preferred payment method across the board. And it seems like that in general, workers are becoming more and more comfortable with digital payments, digital interactions, employee portals, things of that sort, regardless of kind of their skill level, because that's something that's really built in to our everyday life at this point.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that context there, Chris. And so with that in mind, let's circle back to just a little bit earlier when we were talking about the importance of a digital onboarding experience. And this is often where firms will collect that direct deposit information as workers are being onboarded and getting ready for their new assignment. And so we enable your workers through that digital and mobile onboarding workflow to quickly and easily provide your firm with that key information. And so this is how we start to match those worker preferences that we've talked about with an intuitive worker-centric solution. Now, related to capturing that information during onboarding via our talent portal, they're also enabled and empowered through ongoing self-service to be able to come in here and update their information at any time. And so this is important because we want to ensure that your workers are empowered to manage their own data on their own time, as well as reduce your internal administrative burden. You don't want to tie up your recruiters or your operations team with making updates on behalf of workers. Let's give them the access that they need to make those changes in real time and significantly reduce the workload on your teams. Now, where that becomes really valuable is that all of that information then flows right into Green Shades. So that ensures a smooth and seamless process from worker onboarding to the time that they get their first check. There is no manual data entry or copying and pasting of sensitive info into multiple systems. That process is automated. And so the idea here was that we wanted to prevent swivel chair and clerical errors. And by removing those barriers from digitizing the process, it helps to deliver that incredible worker experience, which is directly related back to building loyalty and to adapting to their preferences like we've been talking about today. Now, before we transition into the final chapter of our discussion, I wanted to highlight one other key finding in our research, which was also the importance regarding the frequency of payments and how this ties into our core themes today. Now, over 99% of workers had indicated that they prefer weekly payments, which I thought was really interesting due to the sheer dominance of this finding. Now, this might seem like a no-brainer. Something as simple as paying weekly is really going to have a huge impact on your worker experience because this allows them to then better manage their finances accordingly. They'll have better job satisfaction and when they have accurate and predictable income each and every week. Now, as we looked a bit more broadly across different industries and verticals, we actually saw dramatically different payment frequency preferences, where in healthcare, this number was 84%. In professional staffing, 58% preferred weekly payments. And then in IT, that fell to just 25% there. So an important takeaway with all of this is that we want to keep these preferences top of mind as you think about your candidate acquisition strategy, your differentiators as a business. What can you do to help deliver that incredible experience? And Personally, we think it's by listening to what the industry and our workers are saying. Chris, did you have any additional context that you wanted to share around this as well?
Yeah, really right in alignment with what you're saying, where we are, we are seeing different stats across different industries, and really on a kind of per client level, there are so many factors that can go into, how you need to pay your workforce. So something that we continue to hear and is absolutely built into the GreenShades platform is the ability to choose and control how and what frequency your workers are being paid. So whether we're talking about weekly or biweekly or monthly or whatever that payment cycle is that makes the most sense for your organization, you have the flexibility to configure that accordingly. And it doesn't have to be one size fits all. So you have the ability to construct multiple different payment frequencies within the same organization. So that's absolutely something we hear, and we want to make sure that our clients can certainly respond with through the software.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Definitely the flexibility there being a key piece. So with that, as we kick off our final chapter for today, we've spent a good portion in our first two chapters focusing on worker experience, their preferences, how firms can really meet their workers where they're at in each of their own individual journeys. But in this final chapter, we're going to focus more on the experience of the internal users of your firm, and in particular, what components of the middle and back office processes can be automated to help drive a seamless pay and bill experience each week. Now, I wanted to kick us off with some really interesting findings, once again, from our grid surveys, where we polled commercial and light industrial firms to get their pulse on what the most impactful automations were to their business. And what we found is that the majority of automations that had the biggest business impact were specifically associated with their middle and back office operations. Now, that's not to detract from the importance of sales and recruiting, but really more so to highlight that with the pay and bill complexities that arise for light industrial, the highest ROI processes to automate are going to be the ones in that area specifically. Now, related to this concept, this data was also backed up from high-performing staffing firms in our survey, where 61% of these firms deployed automation to their middle and back office. And so this becomes increasingly important, especially when you start to deal with hundreds and thousands of workers who need to be paid and billed each week. And so we believe that automation really is the cornerstone of scalability, and we're going to talk more explicitly about what some of those automation examples are and how Bullhorn and GreenShades are uniquely positioned to solve them. Now, for the next few moments, Chris and I are going to get quite a bit deeper here into functionality and talk about, well, what does this really look like in practice? And so we wanted to provide a few ways for firms to leverage the systems to be able to assist in that. And so when we talk about really automating the flow of data, specifically for customer pay and bill rates, it is critically important that we have all of those details and the parameters of your customer contracts set in Bullhorn so that it properly cascades down to the job and the placement level. It's important to maintain a system of record, and we want to prevent swivel chair and minimize the amount of time that your team is jumping between different systems. And so we're going to talk about how all of this information easily flows from Bullhorn to GreenShades and back through a bi-directional integration. And then lastly, I'll hand things over to Chris, where he'll go more into depth about GreenShades and how they automate much of that payroll workflow and really alleviate the heavy lift that's typically associated with payroll and tax processing. So let's think back to just a moment ago when we talked about being able to set our contractually agreed upon pay and bill rates at the customer level and have that cascade down to the placement and the job level. And that is exactly what client rate agreements are. And so the idea here is that in an effort to minimize the amount of manual adjustments to rates, you're able to set these rules into effect so that when a new job order comes in and meets this specific criteria, the system already knows which rates to assign. And that's where this all ties into payroll, because those same rates are then being transmitted over to GreenShades. So let's consider a more real-world example here and think about your largest customers, or perhaps those who have many different divisions or different jobs and workers being placed there. There's certainly going to be some complexity with managing all of the associated pay and bill rates for each layer within that organization. Now, that's not something that we want to try and memorize or have written down on a sticky note somewhere. There's better ways to manage and automate it. And so using this example here specifically and taking a look into the matching criteria, anytime we have a job category of a forklift operator, which is a temp position at this specific warehouse, I want the system to automatically apply this rate card. Now, as we look towards the bottom on the rate card specifically, this is where those pay and bill rates are being pulled from. It has the appropriate markups and multipliers, the correct earn codes such as regular, overtime, and double time, even having the ability to include different earn codes such as training pay or orientation hours as just a few quick examples. So when that job comes into the system and a placement is made for a forklift operator at this warehouse, we already know all of those parameters are going to be correct. So where this really starts to pick up momentum is when we talk about scalability. Thinking about this Minneapolis warehouse, all of those potential positions that we're placing there, your picker packers, your general laborers, shipping and receiving, each one of those has its own individual rates. And with Bullhorn, all of those are now properly taken care of and automated. Now, while we're thinking about automation and the transmission of this information over to Greenshades, we're going to have some additional automation running in the background, and that is with our time and labor rules engine, which interprets and calculates time based on rules set in Bullhorn. So this becomes really important when we start talking about compliance and labor laws and streamlining our payroll operations. Now, what this time and labor rules engine really allows us to do is set different rules and parameters around time collection, such that when hours are punched or entered or otherwise imported, Bullhorn is going to run each and every time card through the rules engine and properly calculate the time outputs. So a simple example of this could be something like weekly overtime over 40 hours in a given week, or perhaps daily overtime over 8, depending, of course, on the labor laws of where that work is being completed. And this also applies to calculating things like shift differentials and guaranteed hours and orientation pay. Many of those more nuanced time collection scenarios are now accounted for and automated in Bullhorn. So time and labor really empowers firms to continue to grow and scale, regardless of the complexities that are thrown your way from different state requirements or contractual obligations. It's all built into the system, and time is properly interpreted and calculated each and every pay period. So what this means in terms of our partnership and integration with Greenshades is that Bullhorn, we've done the heavy lifting. All of those pay and bill rates are set on the assignment record. Time is being interpreted and calculated. And so we now have complete confidence that each payroll run is going to be timely, accurate, and an easy experience from start to finish. Now, I'm going to pass things over to Chris here in just a moment, but our payroll process wouldn't be complete without at least a quick mention on billing and invoicing automation. So as we move downstream a little bit, we want to be able to set billing rules at the customer level and have those cascade down accordingly. And so when we talk about things like invoice terms, this is where we can translate your complex customer invoicing requirements into logical billing instructions in Bullhorn, which automates the creation of those properly formatted invoice. And so this becomes really important as you're onboarding new customers, you're getting them set up, or maybe even as your current customers open up new divisions or locations that have their own unique set of requirements. So this allows us to set important parameters like our billing cycles, the payment terms, and of course, maybe any discounts or surcharges that need to be applied. Now, as part of that invoice generation process, it's also imperative to ensure that the display and the formatting of the invoice is going to meet the requirements provided to us from our customers. And this is where the flexibility in the back office becomes incredibly important. And so the idea here with billing profiles and invoicing terms is that this is the automation of your pay and bill process. And so it allows you to really meet and serve the unique needs of your customers and any invoicing curveballs that they may throw your way. So as we focus our lens back to payroll, I'm going to hand things over to Chris to chat through some additional elements of payroll automation and compliance with Greenshades.
All right, thanks, Andrew. So yes, as Andrew noted, we're going to kind of go a little deeper into the payroll process at this point, obviously with the mindset of automation. So a couple things to keep in mind, touch on a few things here. There's so much information, again, really just like the examples we talked about earlier, there's so much information that's flowing in from Bullhorn that's, really already in a really nice, clean slate, right? Our pay rates are managed and all of that, as Andrew covered. And so when we're looking at the Greenshades pay runs, really the main things that we want to be aware of are things like deductions, right? Complicated deductions and benefits for our workforce, for our eligible workers. How are we going to be managing those? And can we manage those in a scalable way, right? Because when we're thinking about automation, it's not only about today and managing the workforce that we have today, but it really is thinking for the future and thinking about scaling our business operations. And so when we're looking at, again, deductions, benefits, complexities that exist there, garnishments, which we'll dive into here in just a moment, and then as well as just really kind of more uncommon or nuanced taxes, that's really, where for me the details can get a lot of fun. So if you will, Andrew, just jump to the next slide, and we'll start with compliance here. So compliance, really probably no surprise to anybody that's listening right now. When it comes to compliance, that's something that you got to get right. You got to get right every time, the first time, and there's really little room for error. And typically the compliance aspect of payroll is what is most intimidating to anybody that's getting into payroll, because no pressure, right? We got to get our workers paid, and we got to do it in a way that's not going to make local and federal and state government agencies upset. So it's important it gets right again first time and every time. So just some examples of this, though, when we're thinking about compliance, garnishments is going to be a big one, right? This is something that is always a conversation with our light industrial clients. It's something that we focus heavily on during the setup and implementation process to make sure that there's full clarity on how this process works. And it's something that's automated directly in the payroll process. So we go through the initial setup, we guide the user through the process. When we receive those court orders, right? The client receives those orders. We need to input those into the system. We can specify, is that garnishment order a child support order? Is it a tax levy? Is it a loan repayment? Whatever we might be dealing with, and then the automated rules within GreenShades are automatically applied so that when we're processing payroll, those disposable earnings will be calculated for our workers. We'll identify how much money can be taken out, and then we will prioritize and prorate where needed when there are multiple garnishment orders in place. So for example, if we have multiple child support orders for the same employees, we're going to be prorating that and ensuring that the correct amount is coming out. And then the other component that's really big when we get into compliance, certainly minimum wage can be a big thing depending on how those workers are being paid. So much of that is really caught early on. On the Bullhorn side, there are additional checks and balances that are built into the pay run process, just in case there is additional data that's brought in that needs to be accounted for. But taxes are going to be the other big thing. So when it comes to local taxes, state taxes, federal taxes, we need to ensure that we are withholding the correct amount of money from the page or from each employee's paychecks at the correct rates. And there's so much that goes into that, especially in the workforce that continues to evolve as workers are perhaps living and working across state lines or working on multiple client sites with different location addresses on a regular basis. That can lead to a lot of nuance and complexities when it comes into taxes. And so with the GreenShades payroll platform, that tax withholding is going to be fully automated. So the federal taxes are going to be applying to the employees, the state taxes, certainly state income taxes, but also things like state unemployment taxes will be applied to the employees, and then even down to the local levels where there's thousands of local jurisdictions across the country. So as our clients are looking to scale and to grow their operations, that's something that absolutely needs to be automated and something that can be fully automated through GreenShades. So when we're thinking about taxes, there's really kind of two parts to it, right? So as I've touched on so far, when we're processing payroll, we need to ensure that the correct taxes are withheld from the employee's paycheck. GreenShades will assist with that. But then after the payroll is processed, there's tax liability that's generated from that pay run, right? It's a combination of monies that have been withheld from that employee's paycheck, and then also just employer liability that we have after we've paid that worker. And so, surprise, surprise, when you hold that money from the employee's paycheck or you have that liability, the government is typically fairly antsy to collect that money and to understand what's going on. And generally, the more money you owe them, the sooner they're going to want to get paid. And so, Andrew, if you can jump into the next slide, that's kind of where the part two of the tax management comes into play through GreenShades, right? So when we're doing those automated payroll processes and we have those taxes being withheld in a very transparent way to where you can see how, what taxes and at what dollar amounts are being withheld from the employees' paychecks. After those paychecks are processed and posted and the employees get paid and everyone's happy, then there are tax liability reports that need to be submitted to various jurisdictions throughout the country. And then there's also those tax liability payments that need to be issued. So through the GreenShades payroll tax service, there's an automated, essentially like a to-do list that's going to be generated for the federal taxes, the state taxes, the local taxes, where we can simply in one interface go in and see for the entire company, what taxes do we have coming due and when. So GreenShades will be calculating all of these due dates for you, calculating all of your remittance schedules and your payment frequencies, whether you need to be semi-weekly or weekly or monthly or whatever it is based on those jurisdiction requirements. GreenShades will be calculating this for you and then giving you a simple platform to submit those tax payments and returns to the appropriate jurisdictions. And one of the big things that we've learned over the last 20 plus years in payroll, and especially in the staffing space, is that we need to ensure that our clients have full control over this process, and especially when it comes to the timing of when those tax liability payments need to be made and when those funds are actually removed from your bank accounts to those receiving agencies. And so the way that GreenShades does this is very unique in that we are going to facilitate that payment process, but similar to like an online payment, if you were. When you come in and we say, hey, here's the liability, here's when it's actually due, you can schedule that payment to be submitted on a future date. So you don't have to hand over that liability on the day that you're processing payroll. You can hold on to that money, keep it in your account to accrue interest and manage your cash flow better until that liability actually needs to be submitted to the agency. So you can schedule it for a future payment date. It's off your to-do list. You can move on and not worry about it anymore, but understand that you're still in full control of the process along the way.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Chris, for all the context there, and specifically with regards to the tax and compliance assistance that GreenShades provides. So with that, that brings us to the end here of our final chapter, where we covered really in depth how Bullhorn and GreenShades help to drive operational efficiency by way of automation, purpose-built solutions, and a very strong partnership that's meant to really tackle the complex needs of light industrial staffing. So before we wrap up for today, wanted to spend the last few moments here and open it up to any questions that you all have regarding anything that we've covered. So please feel free to put those in the chat if you feel more comfortable. Of course, reach out to Chris and I directly. Happy to do that. And we'll hang out here for just a few moments and see what comes our way.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. One question that just came in was, does GreenShades handle non-resident taxes?
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to that. Yeah. So yes, is the short answer. There's a variety of calculations and really back-end complexities that go into that. But depending on the setup and what's needed, there's a variety of things that are going to be tracked through GreenShades to understand those workers, where they're working, where they're living, and then also reciprocity agreements that are in place across various states. And so that's something that can be managed and constructed through GreenShades payroll.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Another question was, how does the integration work between GreenShades and Bullhorn?
Sure. I'll take that one. So I have just a quick slide. I figured this would probably come up at one point here. And so it's really at its core a bi-directional flow of data. And so within the integration, two primary categories of data that I think about, where we're taking that candidate and placement information and then time and pay data and transmitting that from Bullhorn to GreenShades. And the idea is that with that candidate and placement data, that's things like pay rates and earn codes, general candidate information, all of the things that are required to stand up a candidate profile in GreenShades. And the second piece there is that when that time is being collected, those payable charges are then sent from Bullhorn to GreenShades, where the payroll processing is finalized. So once that time is in GreenShades, payroll is processed, including all of the taxes and deductions like Chris was alluding to, and then everybody gets paid as expected. From there, GreenShades can actually also send direct labor costs and other payroll data back into Bullhorn so that you can run deeper level analysis and reporting on that information within Bullhorn.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Our next question is, what makes GreenShades different than other payroll providers that Bullhorn partners with?
I'll start off on this one, and then Chris, certainly want you to add your context here. I would say my experience working with GreenShades personally and have heard from many mutual customers is that really their commitment and knowledge of the staffing industry is their differentiator. And that's built into the way they support their customers, the way the software is configured, and all of that knowledge and expertise has made them certainly a market-leading payroll provider who understands the complexities of the staffing industry, in particular light industrial, which you don't always see with some other big name payroll providers. So I would certainly say it's that expertise experience that has really done really well for our customers. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, appreciate you mentioning all that, and those are all excellent points. And what I would say is just from my personal experience for being here for so many years, I think one of the things that's really differentiated us over the years and kind of how we've grown organically is that frankly we sort of started with the hardest part. So we got started in business over 20 years ago by supplementing other in-house payroll software systems around tax and compliance concerns. So I probably went longest on anything around compliance, and that's what we're always focused on. And so especially starting in that staffing space, needing to be able to handle those really complicated tax scenarios. And then over there, we we grew over time. And so when we got to the point eventually where we said, hey, we need to build the full payroll platform, and then certainly alongside the Bullhorn partnership, what it was really important for us to do was to have a platform that allowed employers and our clients to be in full control, and again, especially control the timing of when things happen, which is so critical in the staffing space, but make sure that they can still have that comfort, that compliance backbone to be able to sleep well at night. And so every decision we make as an organization, every time we're approaching a new situation, it's always first and foremost, what's the compliant component, and then how do we ensure that we have the best client experience while managing the compliance.
Awesome. Thank you both. We just have a few more questions here. Our next one is, if I'm already a Bullhorn One customer, how should I go about looking into switching to Green Shades?
Yeah, I would recommend certainly reaching out to your dedicated account manager here at Bullhorn. Chances are they're going to want to get a bit of information from you, just to make sure do a warm handoff and probably a quick knowledge transfer with Green Shades, just to go ahead and get things kicked off, and so that evaluation can be started. So definitely your dedicated account manager at Bullhorn would be the best place to start for that one.
Awesome. Another question that just came in was, how will Bullhorn and Green Shades use Bullhorn automation to help speed up the payroll process even more?
Yeah, so I'll address that in a couple different ways. I would say that a lot of the themes that we talked about from the course of the webinar were focused on some of those kind of quick hitter automations that we've built out, from the rate agreements and the time and labor. And then there's the concept of even automating through the integration, the transmission of those payable charges right over to Green Shades. And so those are kind of the first iterations as far as, well, this is what we've heard, this is how we wanted to address it. I know that we're continuing to expand and build out different elements of Bullhorn automation to speed that up even further. So I know I see it's an anonymous attendee there. So if you want to reach out to me directly for some specific use cases, we're happy to chat through those. But I would say the ones that we focused on the webinar today are really our primary ones that are driving the automation and the efficiency there between Bullhorn and Green Shades.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. Last question we have here is, I have a lot of workers that prefer pay cards. How does that work with Green Shades?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So we we talked earlier about how there definitely has been more of a focus and preference even more to direct deposit, but as I noted at that time, absolutely, pay cards are still a very popular payment method, and still certainly something that many, if not most of our customers offer in some capacity to their workers. So just a couple of thoughts on the pay cards. If you have a pay card solution and provider that you're working with today that you're happy with, it's meeting your needs, by all means, we don't want to interrupt that process at all, or make you change anything that's working well for you today. So we have flexibility built in to be able to work with a variety of different pay card providers, and we have multiple ways that we can support that to kind of support the operating environment that you're in today. If you if you're in a scenario where you're saying, hey, yeah, we're happy, but we're interested in other pay card providers, we have some preferred marketplace partners through GreenShade's pay card providers that we work very closely with and have a very deep integration with, that are certainly an option as well. But ultimately, whether it's through direct deposit or pay cards, or even paper paychecks, those checks can be calculated accurately through the GreenShade's payroll process. And then depending on what payment preference your workers choose to utilize, the appropriate files can be generated, whether it's a direct deposit ACH or a CSV file or whatever is necessary, or GreenShade's printing and mailing a paper paycheck. Any of those can be supported through GreenShades to ensure that the workers can get paid for the great work that they're doing for your organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Well, that actually concludes our questions for today. I want to give a big thank you to Andrew and Chris for the presentation today. As I mentioned at the beginning, housekeeping items, we did record the session today and we will be sending it out tomorrow. Thank you again, everyone, for attending, and hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you all. Take care.
Yes, thank you.